Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Holland. I'm a businessman and an entrepreneur. I've worked in the corporate world as a CPA, and I've worked in the investment and financial services industry. I've started multiple companies with multi-million-dollar valuations and multi-million dollars in revenue. You can find more about my background and more about our podcast at our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, and of course, converse with us outside of the podcast via Twitter. My Twitter handle is @HollandPodcast. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, where you'll get new updates every week once we post the video version of our podcast on Wednesdays. Thank you so much for joining us each and every Wednesday for our podcast where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Today, I get the pleasure of introducing our guest, Mike Post. I met Mike Post a couple of weeks ago, and as we were talking, his business story was fascinating. He is the owner of a large construction company, more a civil engineering or contracting company on the east part of the United States. And as I said, once we started talking and I heard all the things he went through to get where he is today, I said, will you come on our podcast? Our listeners want to hear these types of inspirational and motivating stories. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Post. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast.
Well, Andrew, thank you. I've been looking forward to this. It'll be good to catch up.
Yeah, so give our listeners a little bit of background about how you grew up, how you got to where you are today, the Shirley Contracting Company. Give us some background.
So, Andrew, I grew up, my father was an employee with a large civil construction firm. And when I was growing up, I was born in a house trailer in Georgetown, Kentucky, as my dad was doing a project outside of Lexington, Kentucky. And we proceeded to, the company he worked for traveled quite a bit doing infrastructure projects in that region. So I think we moved 11 times by the time I was 9 years old.
Wow.
And
by the time you were how old?
So, yeah, by the time I was 9 years old, we moved 11 times, I think it was.
Okay.
And we traveled all over Kentucky and Indiana. And then in 1968, we landed in Richmond, Virginia. And my dad was doing some work for a large construction company then. And while we were in Richmond, Virginia, my father got a call from a company, or his company that he was with was part of a joint venture that was building what they call the original mixing bowl right outside of Washington, D.C. Now, the mixing bowl is on the Shirley Highway, basically from Edsall Road to the 14th Street Bridge, which goes across the Potomac River, and it's right in front of the Pentagon. And at the time, it was the largest joint venture in the United States, and he was asked to be the project manager of the project. So,
And the mixing bowl, is this a road construction project? Is this
Yes.
It's a road construction project.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Right in front of the Pentagon, you said.
Right in front of the Pentagon, widening 395, the Shirley Highway, going into D.C. A very complex project with a lot of excavation, earthwork, a ton of bridges. It's a very complex project. And so he took the job, and we moved to Northern Virginia in 1969. And he worked on that project through 1973, through its completion. And I do like to tell the story, Andrew, that when I was a kid, my dad would get me up every Saturday morning to go into work with him. And my job was to clean the office trailers. We had office trailers right next to the Pentagon. And my pay for that at the time was he would take me out to breakfast. So we went to a little diner in Arlington, Virginia, that's still there to this day, Bob and Edith's. And we'd go to breakfast usually with the superintendent from the project, and then we'd come back to the yard, and I'd get to go work in the shop with the mechanics working on heavy equipment. And
Nothing like building that good work ethic at a young age, right? On Saturday morning.
that's exactly right. So then, when he finished that project, he decided he wanted to start his own construction company. So he named it Shirley Contracting Corporation after the joint venture's name was Shirley Constructors. And he took some of the people that he worked with on that project and brought them aboard the company and started Shirley Contracting back in April 10th of 1974. And their primary focus is the same focus that we have today, and it's primarily on transportation, road-related projects, but also heavy civil projects, whether it be airport, rail, tunnels, dams, all those different components in heavy civil work. And I worked as a kid throughout my younger days when I was in, I guess probably started when I was 12, I think. I wasn't allowed to work on public projects because I wasn't 18, but
Sure.
so
Oh, I bet if you were able to, your dad would have had you out there plugging away.
well, prior to joining Shirley full time, when I turned 18, I did work for a couple other construction companies. I worked as a laborer, and then when I came to work when I was 18 years old, I'd work the summers and the winters as a laborer. Then I worked as a carpenter. I drove pile. I got to grow up in the trades, and that was kind of my experience. And then I went to a local university here, George Mason University, after I graduated from high school to pursue my degree in accounting. And the whole duration while I was working at Shirley, I was working another part-time job and going to school. So I got to work in the estimating department. I guess got to work in the cost accounting department. And when I got out of school, I got to work as a project manager on several projects on jobs. And then, Andrew, I wasn't sure that construction was my career path, so I actually took a sabbatical for about 3 months.
And how old are you at this time about?
I would have been in my 20s, early
Okay.
20s. And I took about 3 months off and went to go, quote unquote, find myself. And what I realized, Andrew, the interesting thing is I missed the people in construction. There's one thing about construction workers, and that is they don't mind telling you what's on their mind and telling you the truth. Whether you like it or not, that's what
Yeah.
they do. And I missed that. I missed that and wanted to come back. So I came back and joined the company full time. And after a couple years, I realized that I had grown up within my dad's company. And I felt that I needed to go get some experience elsewhere. So I left Shirley and I went to work for actually a competitor of Shirley's.
Oh, how did your dad feel about that?
Well, he knew the owner of the company, and
Okay.
he was okay with it. He was okay with it. So from 1988 until 1992, I worked for another construction company doing similar type work. Um, and I felt that I needed to get some experience on working with other managers and other people and learn different skill sets. And it was a great learning experience for me. I look back on it and I really developed some wonderful relationships there and that I still have to this day. So it was good. And then Andrew, in 1992, it was early 1992, I got a call from my father who said he had cancer. And
Wow.
he was 55 years old. And he asked me to come back to Shirley and help him sell the company because he wanted to make sure that my mom would be taken care of for the rest of her lives should he not be able to survive the cancer. So I came back in May of 1992 and helped him put a package together and hire an outside firm to look at selling the company. And we met with a couple large international construction companies that was interested in the company. And then he passed away in July of 1992 before we had put any deals together.
Wow. So it was very fast.
Very fast, very fast. And, my dad and I were best friends. He was my best man in my wedding. He was a great guy. And it was a tragic loss for the family. but I also had to consider his legacy of what he had created with the company and make sure that I could try everything in my power to um, complete that legacy or carry that legacy forward. So after he passed away, a mutual friend, business associate of mine, introduced me to the president of then Omni Construction Company. And I got to know the gentleman pretty well, and we proceeded to have some conversations. And in late 92 or early 93, went into a due diligence. We'd come to terms on a potential deal to follow my dad's wishes to sell the company. And we closed the deal in June of 1993 to where Omni Construction, which is now called Clark Construction Group, acquired the majority share of Shirley. And that's what got us to become a subsidiary of the Clark Construction Group, which, by the way, is one of the largest privately held construction companies in the United States now. So that's a little bit of my history. That's the
Yeah, that's great background. We covered a lot of territory. So, first off, accounting, a man after my own heart. So, have full of appreciation for that. I want to take a step back and get into your dad's mind for just a bit, to the extent that you guys talked about this. And the reason this is so important is because a lot of people are in the exact same situation that you described your dad as being in. What was your dad's name, Mike?
Bob Post.
Bob.
Yeah.
So that Bob, your father, was in working for someone else, really understanding the industry, pretty much running the company, if you will. And I'm not sure if he was doing that specifically, and wanting to go out on their own. You said he decided to start his own company. That's a huge decision. How did that transpire? Had he always been entrepreneurial, as you remember growing up? Was he tired of pretty much doing all of the work for someone else? Give us a little bit, to the extent that you have a window into his mind, and you guys talked about this, and with him being your best friend, my guess is you guys talked about it a lot, because that's a big leap. He had a family. It's a huge risk, and a lot of people are afraid to take that risk, and understandably so. And remind me again how old he was when he took that risk.
So he took that risk in 74. I'd have to do the math to figure out how old he is, but
But 30s, 40s, 50s. I mean, he wasn't a young
40s, yes, correct.
Okay, so he wasn't a young kid. He's got a family. He's got a lot of responsibilities, obviously personally, but he decides to start a company. I mean, that's a big deal, and that's a jump that a lot of people want to make, and they're incredibly scared to make because, as we all know, as you said, and as a lot of us did, when you're in your 20s, you can take some time off to find yourself. Well, you don't have the luxury of doing that when you're 30 or 40 and you got a lot of mouths to feed. So give us a little bit of background, to the extent that you and your dad talked about that, on how that transpired.
Well, one of the things I will tell you, Andrew, is in the construction world, construction industry, when you get to become a project manager, you are, in theory, the person running that job. You're running every aspect of that job. And especially when you're doing a joint venture. This joint venture was with, I believe it was 4 other companies that
Okay.
all agreed to pursue this project themselves, and if they got it, to go build it. So he had the responsibilities of hiring people, of acquiring equipment, of selling equipment, of making sure that they're getting paid for what they need to get paid for, paying all the bills. So you, in theory, are running a company when you run
Yeah.
a project, because you have all financial responsibility for the project and its performance, and you have the responsibility for the people. So I think my because of that, he felt he had a majority of the skill sets it would take to run his own construction company. Now, when he started, he did joint venture with another company on their
Okay.
first project to allow him to get some additional resources and help to start Shirley. And that partnership went very well. It was with a gentleman he had known for years that owned their own construction company and also helped guide him in the things he needs to be doing to run a successful construction company. So we
Yep.
started out small. He started out with one project as a joint venture, and he just was successful and continued to build the organization and grow the organization slowly. Because the one thing I will tell you about a construction company, Andrew, is it is very capital intensive. When you start looking at buying equipment and buying, trucks and vehicles and all those components you need to do the work yourself, and you're a self-performed contractor, so that means we hired the people that build the bridges, we hired the people that operated the equipment, we hired the people that pour the concrete. So it is a very capital intensive, so it takes a while to,
Yeah.
and one of the things I will tell you, he's very conservative, and I did learn this from him, and that is, you build the equity in your organization so that you have the capital to continue to grow. Okay. So yes, for years we lived in a rented house before we could buy our first house. Okay. Um, so and we continue to run the organization the same way as very, very conservative, and always reinvest the the profits of the company into the company so that you can continue to buy new equipment, to provide good benefits for your people, and continue to diversify your organization and grow your organization.
Did you ever take on debt to do that?
No.
Wow. Mike, you guys never took on debt
Well,
in
I
a
want.
civil construction company. Because that's impressive. I've had a construction company, it completely different, more in the residential housing, but you want to talk about capital intensive as you just described. I was in the garbage industry and that's very capital intensive. You're talking about Caterpillar machines. You guys had to buy all that and you were able to do that without taking on really any meaningful amount of debt?
Well, Andrew, I will tell you, I can't answer in the early days when my dad
Okay.
started. Okay, I'm sure he did have debt. I'm not going to say never, but it got to a point when I took over the company that I had to borrow some money one time when I took over the company. I told myself we would never do that again, and we never have. And again, that just means that you have to make some sacrifices,
Yeah.
and just continue to do your best to make good money for the company so that you can reinvest that capital in the company.
In this day and age, when everything is at our fingertips in a matter of 5 to 10 seconds, I want everybody to listen to what Mike just said. They had to make the sacrifices, and it took a long time to get to where you are. Mike, you and I both know people that they're going to start a company and they're going to be rich overnight. And we see all these stories, whether it's in the Entrepreneur or Fortune 500 or Inc. or what have you, or we're watching a documentary, and it's an excerpt of From Rags to Riches, and it makes people think this can happen just like that. But on the contrary, I mean, just look at the story that you just described, how many years it took for your dad and the risk he had to take. And then ultimately in 1993, 94, you taking over the company, and you remember those sacrifices as a kid. And I want to focus on, so he started the company. I think one of the biggest questions anybody that's trying to start a company or run a business, and you just gave us a really good window on how you can do that successfully, is he partnered with someone that he trusted to help with resources because he was in a particular capital intensive industry. Now, I imagine he had saved up a bit of his own money to start the company. And so he had been very frugal, as you said, very conservative.
Yes, that is correct.
So talk to me about the early 90s. What you just described and your dad getting well, first, why did you want to leave Shirley Contracting Company?
I
Did
truly,
you just like want to spread your wings for a little while? And because a lot of people who are working in whether it's their parents' business or great grandparents, or I've heard that story time and time again. For you particularly, did your dad say you need to go out? It sounds like you made that choice to do that. Give us a little bit more insight there.
well, a couple things. So, as a child of a company owner, when you're working amongst others, you have to prove yourself, which means you typically have to work twice as hard as everybody else. Okay? You need to prove your worth, that you're not there because you're dad's son. Okay? You're there because you can do the job just as well as anybody else. Okay?
That's excellent.
And I had been doing that my whole career. And secondly, is my dad wanted to advance me quicker in the company than I thought I was ready. I didn't feel I had all the skill sets or that I'd seen the rest of the world, for lack of a better term, to
Mm-hmm.
see how other people operate their companies. And I just felt it was important for my career development to make sure that I saw how other people manage their construction company and meet new people and look at new markets. So it was really my dad didn't want me to go, but he understood why
Mm-hmm.
I needed to go.
Yeah.
And again, I tell you, it was one of the best 4 years of my life was to get that experience and meet those new people and build those relationships outside of my father's company.
When you went for accounting and you had left the construction industry for a time period, were you working in more of a white collar industry at that point in time?
Um, I have to think back, Andrew. I think my dad I had run projects, several projects as a
Mm-hmm.
project manager, and I'd worked myself into that position, and I'd worked in the office in estimating. And I think my dad had wanted to move me into more of a corporate management standpoint, and that's when I felt I wasn't ready. I felt
Okay.
that I needed some more field experience, construction experience, understanding how you put work in place before I was ready to take on any management roles from a corporate standpoint.
And the reason I ask that is because one of the things that you said that I've also experienced, because having been in the corporate world and working more in the white collar, not that there aren't great people there, but when I got involved in a more blue collar industry, I began to experience exactly what you described, the love of the people there. There is such a genuineness, whether you like it or not, of the people in blue collar industries in the trades. And I had never experienced that before. You know, we had started our company when I was really young. I was pretty cocky, very naive to the benefits of what other humans have to bring. But being in the blue collar industry, it just what you described, how important the human side of it is, to the extent that you realized you desperately missed that. You wanted that. And so it brought you back. Be more specific about why that was such a draw to you and what you missed there, because I experienced the same thing, and it was so eye-opening for me, because not to say that there's nothing wrong with white collar jobs, but there's certainly a level of it's just different than blue collar. There's always maybe a wall, and not everybody, but in blue collar, it's if you're on a job site and someone doesn't like what you're doing, they're going to tell you. And if they had a bad weekend or a great weekend, there's a genuineness there, as I described. Tell me about how you missed that and how strong of a pull that was for you coming back.
Well, number one is that's where I developed my relationship with learning how to do skilled trades. Okay. Um, and it still hasn't changed to this day, but you learn from your supervisor how to run up a spud, to seat a pile, to drive a pile. You talk to the crane operator. And on a lunch break, he'll let you get up in the crane and let you learn how to run a crane. So you gain a respect for these professionals that
Yeah.
are working in the skills, the skill sets, or the crafts.
Yep.
And like you said, they are truly humble people working, 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, sometimes seven, to help create something, to build something that, by the way, benefits society. Okay, right, wrong, or different. Transportation gets us to and from school.
Society wouldn't exist, period, if we didn't have people that are skilled. I mean, roads, bridges, exactly what your company does. We'd be in a bit of a trouble.
Yeah. The other thing, Andrew, I will tell you is a construction company is nothing without its craft professionals. Okay? These are the people that are out there shoveling, putting pipe in the ground, building bridges. You need the carpenters, you need the crane operators, you need the off-road truck operators. Those I can't exist our white collar, and I don't like to call them white collar, but our management team can't exist without those people, okay? And for me, our org chart is an upside down triangle, okay? And our crafts people, our crafts professionals are at the top, and I'm at the bottom, okay? Because if I'm not getting them good work, if I'm not getting them good benefits, if I'm not getting them good opportunities to grow, then they don't need me, okay? I'm not doing my job if I'm not providing the things they need to have a good living, provide for their families, put work in place, and help build assets that we create. So I think that a lot of management people forget they can't do it without these people, and those people are more important as we are, okay? So that's what draws me to the construction industry because, again, you're dealing with some phenomenal people. And trust me, over the years, and you know it as well, you lay in bed at night, when am I going to get the next job? How am I going to make sure they got a job to go to build so that we can make some money in the company and reinvest and provide them better benefits and be able to provide them retirement funds and things like that. So
That's such an incredible point, Mike, and I want everybody to take note of that because it's worth saying again. And I think in corporate America, sometimes that's missed. A company is nothing without the employees, period, plain and simple. And what you just described, your company is meaningless without the people who run your company. And I think that's such an important lesson that's so easily missed in this day and age. People are just viewed as numbers. People are viewed as a salary on a payroll. And to hear it directly from you, it's no wonder to me that your company has been so successful. Because when I look at companies that are the most successful, I could name off a list of them. It's almost always because they realize who's first and who's at the top of the org chart, the employees, as you described. And the ones that have troubles are the ones who have that whole org chart, traditionally how you think, management sitting at the top. And it's so awesome for our listeners to be able to hear a perfect world example of someone who's been incredibly successful, and that's how you ran your company. I've talked to our listeners about documentaries that I've been watching on Hulu. It's really by the History Channel. Milton Hershey was one of the first people to really, in America during the industrial age, take that concept. He built a whole town just for his people before he even knew the recipe for chocolate. Like, that was a risk that is nobody would do today, but he recognized the importance of that. So thank you for sharing that and telling us in a real world example. And you're in management and you realize that's important. That's a lesson for all of us because it's easy to, and I've experienced this, get caught up in the day-to-day activity of business. And when you're sitting at the top, get stuck in your ivory tower. I just use those quotes because everybody knows what it means. Go down to the line. Talk to the people that are doing it every day. Don't make strategic decisions about your company without talking to the people who are the most important and the ones that actually make your company work. And my guess is that's exactly how your company operates. When you guys are going to make a strategic decision, to the extent that you need input from it's going to have an impact across the company, you guys have company meetings. You talk to everybody on the ground whose lives are going to be impacted by that type of decision. Is that true?
That is true. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, your company as a whole, okay? It's every employee in the company, and the decision you as a leader of an organization impacts these people's lives, and you need to be aware of how it impacts them. And so you have to take into consideration: do you have when you want to grow a company, do you have the skill set? Do the people have the skill sets to go into a new industry? Do the people have the willingness to want to go in and try something new? So yes, you have to have buy-in, and that's why I always like to talk about the business planning process. And you come up with your annual business plan. And what I have found, Andrew, I'm getting a little bit off track, but
this is great.
You'll put the plan in place, and you'll want to accomplish it that year. You never accomplish it that year. It typically takes you about 3 years to accomplish what you had made in that first year business plan, okay? Because what you're doing is you're getting buy-in by the culture and making sure it's a good fit for the organization to get into a new line or grow the company or whatever that business plan item was. And it's funny. I've got a stack of my business plans over here, and I go through them, and I was like, "Daggone it, we talked about this 3 years ago, and we're finally getting to it and making it come to reality."
Well, and I think that's so important because, as entrepreneurs, we tend to be impatient in a positive way. We want to move and move and move, and that's like whether it's in an entrepreneur's genetic DNA, but buy-in is so important, really, in anything in life. Family vacation or it doesn't matter what it is. Buy-in and taking the time and hearing from the people that are most relevant to that decision. I want to switch topics a little bit because part of the reason that I had started this podcast is being in the business world can be a very lonely venture, especially if you're not surrounded by a lot of other business owners. And so a lot of friends that you may have that maybe are working in the corporate world or not embarking on a business or an entrepreneurial endeavor, they might not understand, or you feel like they don't understand what you're going through. And so when all of us as entrepreneurs get the opportunity to hear your story and some of the toughest moments that you had, it's very inspiring and motivating. I want you to take us back to 1992, 93. You get that call from your dad. You're probably early 30s. Is that about right?
Yes.
You're working at a competitor. You're trying to get experience. And I mean, I can't even really imagine what that call was like because, we have professional problems, but this was an incredibly terrifying personal problem. And now you have a company involved and you've been working with them to sell the company. Take us back there and tell us, how did Mike think? How did you feel when you got that? And tell us the toughest moments of that and how you got through it.
All right, so what I will tell you is I was 29 years old when I came back, Andrew, and a young kid that, knew how to build a job, okay, knew how to do some of the trades, had never run a company. So after, well, excuse me, when my dad passed away and I met with a gentleman by Dan Montgomery, who was the president of Omni Construction at the time. And we talked for quite a while on coming up with the terms that would look good and benefit the sale of the company and look good for them as the buyer of the company. So to make sure that we aligned. One of the most important things I found at that time was to surround yourself with very strong advice, okay? Whether it be legal, whether it be financial, to be honest with you, all the above. And to draw on those people to help give you their thoughts and opinions, not tell you what to do. That's
I'm sure there are a lot of people saying you got to do this and you got to do this, especially at 29. Did you get that type of not that any of us deserve respect at 29, but you know what I mean. We're young kids there, so when you're working with professionals like that, they're probably like, "Oh boy, we really got to help this kid along."
Yes, I did have some of that, but again, fortunately, I had some really good advice to help me make good decisions for, number one, and most importantly, was my mom, okay? That was my dad's wishes, and I was going to abide by his wishes, okay?
Yeah.
And number two, for the employees of the company, and then I was at the bottom, okay? To be honest with you, I needed to make sure I took care of everything else because that was my dad's values, okay?
Yeah.
And I was scared to death, Andrew, because not only did I have this company that I had to take care of, he had some real estate ventures as well that I had to wind down and take care of. And by the way, if you remember back in the 92, 93 range, we were in the Great Recession.
We had the S&L crisis during that time frame.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it was a very, very difficult time. I tell people that I got my MBA about in a 3-year period after my dad passed away on selling a company, divesting of some real estate assets in a recession, so I just my advice is make sure you surround yourself with good advisors to provide you options and opportunities for you to make the ultimate decision. Okay. Secondly, is make sure that when you're doing a transaction as such, is that you are going and you understand who's going to acquire you and their values. And does that align with what you want for your organization? I was very fortunate to meet Dan. I was very fortunate to meet the people at Omni. I spent quite a bit of time talking to people over there, making sure that we were going to be aligned as a company. And once I realized it was a good fit, that's when we decided we'd move forward. And
Did you interview a couple different companies, or was the first one that you found because Dan was helping you, or
no,
was it?
we had interviewed while my dad was still alive. We had interviewed with a couple international construction
Oh, you
companies.
said that. Okay, yep.
Correct. And we just did not feel that they were a good fit for us. Okay. And when I talked to Dan, we realized that we aligned our values, and it's something that his company wanted to venture into was the civil works because they were a building company. Okay. And it's just a good fit for everybody. Now, don't get me wrong. After we got the companies together and we sold the company, we had a couple very rough years. We had a couple rough years. We had a president at the company at Shirley that my dad had named who did not like the idea of us selling the company. So he left pretty quickly after the transition. And we had a couple tough jobs. And, right, Robert?
You said he left after the transition, the
Yes.
president?
Yes, he
Okay,
did.
so he didn't like the idea of selling.
Correct.
He left after the transition,
Yes.
and so you just sell, and now you're kind of without a president for a little while.
That is correct. They named me president in 1995, CEO
Okay.
and president in 1995. And basically
You're how old?
31 years old,
Okay.
maybe.
So president and CEO of this massive civil construction company at 31.
Correct. And yes,
And you also taking care of your family, really, right? Because
Yes.
your dad had passed away.
Yes. Yeah. It was an exciting time.
So, well, yeah, I thank you very much for sharing it. I know it may be hard to go back there, but I got chills when you were talking, when you said you were scared to death, because I think that's, in my personal experience, and I think for a lot of us, we may have some tough times in the professional world, but here you were facing crisis both personally and professionally, and look at where you are today. And I want to piggyback on that. The human psyche is not meant to have the highs and the high highs of business and the low lows of business. It's literally like this. It's up and down like a mountaintop. How have you found what are the best methods you've found to cope with the volatility that being in business comes with? The emotional volatility.
So, Andrew, that's a very good question. And you have to love what you're doing. You have to be passionate about it. People for years have asked me what my hobby is. My hobby is work. I love it. Okay.
I love that answer. I tell people the same thing, and they look at me like I'm crazy. So I'm not crazy, everybody out there.
You're not crazy. You're not crazy. And you just deal with it. I mean, you just deal with it. And number one, I was very blessed to have good advisors. I was very blessed to have a good partner that helped guide me. Okay, when I needed advice. I was very much motivated that I wanted to continue my father's legacy and prove to him and my family that we could take this thing to new heights. Okay. There was lots of ups and downs, and it is, yes, extremely lonely. Okay. But, secondly or thirdly, whatever I'm on now, surround yourself with super strong people and super smart people.
And I'm assuming that's both personally and professionally.
That is correct. That is correct.
Yeah.
But I will say most of my personal friends are my professional friends too.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a big mix between those.
There-
So let's talk about your business. I believe that there are some principles that apply to all businesses, and then there's key performance indicators within your specific business. How have you guys, and this is a big question for a lot of companies, and from the smallest company to the largest company, because you don't get an immediate ROI, return on investment, marketing. Tell us how you guys get jobs and how you guys decide, and what advice you would give to smaller companies who maybe don't have the years of experience in an industry on knowing where to best put their marketing dollars. Talk to us about how you think about that as it relates to your company, and then the advice that you would tell other people, regardless of the industry, on how do you make that decision, because you don't get an immediate return on investment necessarily with marketing dollars. It's not like you buy a backhoe and there it is, your money. You know what your money got you.
Well, Andrew, we're in a little bit of a different realm from the standpoint of most of the work we do is for public agencies. So whether it be the Virginia Department of Transportation or the Maryland State Highway Administration or the Federal Highway Administration or GSA or NAVVAC, all public agencies for the most part. And it's a hard bid world, okay? Hard bid meaning they give you the plans, you estimate how much you think it's going to cost, you submit your bid, you hope that you're smarter than everybody else and you can do it cheaper than everybody else, and you get the job if you're the low bidder, okay? So in that world, number one is there's not so much marketing per se as it is of understanding what those opportunities are out there with these different public agencies so that you can find the best fit for your organization, your people. And then secondly is make sure that you've developed the skill sets of your team to be the lowest cost producer. Okay? In a hard bid competitive world, you have to be the low bidder, okay? And that means you have to produce your product cheaper than others so that you can get the job and make a margin that you can reinvest into the organization. Now, as we grew, Andrew, we got into new markets, okay? We got into the private market where, yes, there was marketing involved. We got into what we call the design build work, where we go in and we put in a proposal to design and build an asset. And that takes a ton of effort from our marketing department to put these proposals together that are.
What are a few examples of, so you're coming to, so what you described before is a request for proposal process. You get RFPs.
Yes.
And as you said, that's an incredibly intense, competitive bidding process that is basically all relies on cost. That can be as tough, if not tougher, than having the opportunity just to market and having customers come to you. I've been involved in a number of RFPs, again, in the trash services industry, but I like what you described as it's not exactly how we think of marketing, but really, you got to know your marketing and your numbers better than in any other scenario if you're going to actually win that bid. Did you ever win a bid where you weren't the lowest bidder?
Yes, we have. So we entered back in the late 90s, early 2000s. The construction industry and the infrastructure world started to dabble into what they call design build. And it's a two-step process. So the public agency comes out and says, we want you to build this interchange. And they give you a rough idea of the concept of what they want it to look like or what they think it should look like. And they say, so we want you to, number one, show us your qualifications, that you have a team that can design and build and do all the components associated with that. And if we think you're applicable, then we're going to move you to the RFP stage, and then we want you to submit a technical proposal and a price proposal. Technical proposal includes your design, your approach to the job, how you're going to handle safety, how you're going to handle quality, all those components to it. And then your price proposal follows under sealed bid. And what happens is they score the technical proposal, okay? And based on how strong they think it is or how weak they think it is, then you submit your price proposal after that. And then what they do is they have a formula that says, okay, you scored 93 on your tech proposal, but you were the third bidder on the number. But when you do our formula, you end up being low bidder because you had a stronger technical proposal.
Okay, so they assign value to non-financial
Correct.
aspects of the job.
Correct. What's your approach? How quick do what's your schedule? How are you going to handle public utilities? How are you going to handle the environmental permitting? All those components, and you get scored on that. And like you said, that factors into your number to determine who is what they believe the lowest responsive bidder.
Sure. Now that design build, we talked about the RFP. It sounds like that's a little bit of an RFP there. Is it still technically considered RFP in what you just described, or no?
It's called a two-step design build process. You go through
Okay.
an RFQ, which is request for qualifications, where you say, this is our team, this is our approach. Then you go to the RFP stage, which is twofold: technical proposal and price proposal.
Okay.
In the RFP
And
stage.
where do the marketing dollars come in there? You said that in the design build world, as you guys grew and entered into different parts within the industry, you really had to spend a significant amount of ad dollars.
Yes, and that is because you have to develop these concepts and these technical proposals. You need a team of writers. You need a team of the technical experts to write all of the text in your technical proposal. You need to have your estimating team that's putting your numbers together on what the price is going to be. It takes quite a bit of effort to put this, and this was something we designed early on in the late '90s to invest in with our company because we saw where we thought the market was going to go. So we got in early to develop a team, and yes, it was an investment from the company into this group that this is what we're going to do, and we knew it was going to take a while to earn that return back, and it's done very well for us over the years.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a little bit of a broader step out and talk about specific attributes and concepts based on your experience and advice that you can give to other people that are trying to accomplish either what you've accomplished in your industry or outside. And you've already given us a lot, advisors. It is lonely, but pull through and keep working because it will come. When you think about how you define success, our whole society is seems to put a financial mindset on success. And when you look back throughout your entire career and all the experience that you've had and the ups and the downs, what to you are the three most important things that you have learned about becoming successful, and how do you define success?
So, I don't know that you can ever define what success is and where that lands you in life. What I think motivates me is providing opportunities for people to grow. Okay, and there's a lot to that, and that might be where the three items you're looking for is in.
Yeah.
But number one is the right people for the organization. Okay, but more importantly is providing those individuals with the opportunities to grow with the organization and take on more responsibility. I look back at my career, Andrew, and you said it earlier, at 29 years old, I was dumped into the position of selling a company, and right, wrong, or different, I did it, okay? Then they named me president, and I had to make some tough decisions over the years to downsize the company before we grew the company, okay?
Yeah.
Again, tough decisions, but I did it at a very young age. And I think some people think that you have to have the gray hair, and I don't agree with that. I think that people that share the right attributes and the right passions and the right values, okay, they're ready for it. Give it to them. Let them
Yeah.
try it, okay? Secondly is integrity, okay? I'm One of our core values is integrity, okay? And our partner in Clark Construction has the same value, okay? You always do what's right, okay? There's no gray, okay? You're going to do what's right or don't do it for the company. Um, Number three is make sure that the business you're in fits the risk you can control, okay? We're in a very risky business.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it, you go build a road, what happens if you uncover a landfill, okay? You know, what risk are you willing to accept that you have control over versus whoever owns the land or owns the property or whatever, they control those risks. So never put your company at risk for something that you can't control, okay? You've always got to be able to say, no, that's not for us. We don't need to do that. It's just, we can't control it, so we don't need to be in that business.
Yeah.
So that's a couple of them. I could probably go on for hours with.
No, I think those are so important. You know, the moment I mentioned integrity, integrity is something that almost like a perfume or a smell. We have an innate sense as a human being when we are talking with someone or when we are working with people that have that as a core tenet. And it was evident to me almost immediately as you and I were talking that integrity is one of your core tenets. It's not something you fake. It's not something you say, although a lot of people do it, and then behind closed doors you take a different approach because that's that everybody can smell that or sense that. And so that's such I'm so thankful that you are bringing that out because I think that's often lost in this day and age in the pursuit of the dollar. Everything is about that almighty dollar, and there's nothing wrong with being financially successful. I think it's fantastic. It's the American dream. But don't sacrifice your key principles and your core principles like integrity to get that. And you're a perfect example of you don't need to. And as a matter of fact, my hunch is because you have that level of integrity, it's helped you win RFPs that you weren't the lowest bidder on. It's seen as a competitive advantage and has allowed you to propel the company into new heights because you stuck to your core values, even though there might have been some other projects. And I'd like to hear from you specifically on this, where maybe there was an opportunity to, in that short-term moment, really grow the company, but it didn't match with your core values of integrity and always thinking about the employees and doing what's right. And so you passed on them. I'm assuming you've seen a number of those opportunities and you've done exactly what you just described. You've passed on them. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely, Andrew. I'll never forget one of our business plan items years and years and years ago was to look at larger infrastructure projects. And I'll never forget a company from the West Coast flew in and met with me, and they said, well, you can never do it on your own. You need to joint venture with us. It's the only way you're going to grow the company. And I really felt the values of that organization did not match the values of ours. And we said no. We said no, thank you. And then, by the way, what we did is we strategically put in place the things we needed to do to be able to go after a larger project ourselves. And to be honest,
without sacrificing your core values.
That's correct. And we didn't start doing joint ventures until probably 10 years after that. And we do very few joint ventures, in all honesty, because again, we want to be able to make sure the company we do joint venture with has the same values, treats people the same, believes in the same thing, has integrity, and we have met some of those companies, and we continue to do business with those companies. So, and I could give you there's projects out there that we looked at that we said just does not fit our company. It's not a good fit. Yes, we may be the only bidder, but we don't know that we can control it, and it's just not good for our people. And by the way, we've gone through some failures.
You just read my mind. So you've been very gracious with your time, and so I want to be respectful of that. Talk to me about failures, because that's where we learn the most. And tell us some of the failures you've had, how you recovered from them, because that's where you really win your stripes. And for me, I've told my listeners, if you want a list of failures, I probably have a longer book than basically anybody on this planet. So tell us about some of the struggles that you had and some of those failures.
So I will tell you, we had a project up in Maryland. It was a bridge job over the Monocacy River. And our estimator had gone to the job and looked at the job and said, the river's not that deep. It's not a big deal. It should be a piece of cake. And, we took the job, we took it cheap, and realized, got out there and said, there's a reason that this bridge is so big, so long, because at some point that water's going to come up. And Andrew, during that job, we hit 200-year floods, I think 3 50-year floods, and a couple 25-year floods, and it was a disaster of a job. It's one of those ones we should have gone and looked and said, okay, there's a reason this bridge is 1,000 feet long and the creek is only 20 feet wide, because at some point that river's going to get 1,000 feet wide.
Yeah. What time of the company was that?
That was back in the mid-90s.
So you were really hungry and you needed business.
Yes.
So it's funny you say that, because one of the common themes is in business is, number one, when you're hungry because you have a business and you have people to provide for, and you're also excited about getting new jobs and getting people to work, sometimes even the biggest elephant in the room you miss. And it's so helpful for me personally, because I can tell you how many huge elephants that are literally 5 inches away from my eyeballs that I've missed in certain areas of business or projects that I've gone after. It happens to all of us. It happens to everybody. I mean, it's the nature of being in business, putting yourself out there, taking the risk, accepting that you're going to fail some of the times, and that's where you're going to learn and you're going to be able to move forward. What did you learn from that project? And if you had to encapsulate so many of the other failures, of course, job specific, in that scenario, making sure that you understand the power of nature and why things are the way they are before you go into it. But generally speaking,
you, as the leader of an organization, need to understand every component of your business better than anybody else in the company. Okay? For years, Andrew, when we were bidding any job, I read every specification. I went through every plan sheet. I knew it better than the estimating team did, okay? When we were in the insurance market and looking at insurance, I needed to understand what all the options were out there. And you always push back. You always push it. There's always got to be a better way. The other one is build your team, okay? And trust everybody's opinion. And people come into me with problems all the time, and the first thing I always say is, what's your solution? Okay? Don't come to me with a problem if you don't have a cafeteria plan of solutions that you believe. Once you have that, let's sit down and hear it. For years, Andrew, I had a gentleman by the name of Chris Bucher, who was my number two. He was my right hand. We were partners in the business, and unfortunately he passed away at a young age. But Chris and I always took a problem, and it didn't matter if we both believed what the answer was. One of us always took the opposing view, okay? So if it was a job to go after and we loved it, one of us would have to say, why wouldn't we want this job? What could go wrong on this job that could take our company or impact our company negatively?
So smart.
And so those are my couple tidbits of advice to help try to keep you out of those. Utilize your team that you've developed to help you make good decisions for the company, and then know more about whatever you're working on than the other person.
I love a couple things that you just said there, specifically about when you're the owner. A lot of people view business owners and, oh, you got the great life and all the money. When you're the owner of a business, you're there before everybody, you're there after everybody, you know everything in the company. And so if you're thinking about embarking on being a business, prepare yourself mentally for that. You heard it from Mike right there, that you got to know everything. You might have a group of estimators, you need to be better than they do. And not better we understand what we're talking about. You need to understand what they're doing, because, as you said, you had someone go out to the job and maybe they missed some. You need more minds. You need more people involved doing that. And I love your other one. Don't complain if you don't have a solution. I mean, we're all guilty of complaining about things before we have a solution, and both personally and professionally. And so that's such a good reminder that, okay, you got to think of a solution. If there's a problem, find a way to fix it. And you've built your business on that exact concept. And I love what you and your business partner did. I mean, that's, as I think about where I've made all the mistakes, it's because my business partner, Jeff, and I were both so excited, and we didn't take the opposing view. I mean, such a simple concept, but we missed it. So it's interesting to hear that you guys wisely took that approach. I want to encapsulate things. Thank you so much for your time, Mike. Is there anything else as you think about everything you've gone through, the personal struggles, the professional struggles, that if you had 1 or 2 minutes to tell our listeners or to tell someone in front of you, you want to go into business or you're in business and you're having a problem or how to approach it, what advice would you give to them?
Great question, and I've covered a bunch of them as we've spoken here, Andrew, but it's not easy. And I think that some people think it's got to be very easy to do. And it does take a toll on you personally, it does take a toll on your family. Um, so when you're going in, you have to be all in. And you got to be willing to work the hours. That means if you got to be in the office all day Saturday and some days Sunday, guess what? This is what you got to do for the company.
Yeah.
Your people are relying on you on being very good at running this organization. So it's just not easy. But you also, the other thing is you got to know your market. You got to know what you're doing. You got to have the professionals with you that can help you develop it, come up with the ideas. Perfect example is, I've been back at the company now 31 years, Andrew, and we've only purchased 2 companies in the whole time that we've been here. And that's because we go look at these other organizations that are looking for a purchaser, and we just don't think it's a good fit for the organization and the right people for the organization. And sometimes it's financial that, their expectations are X and we're at Y, and that's fine. Just don't take it personally. We have to run a profitable business. That's what our responsibility is. So, and then the most important is live to your values. Do not cross the line on your values. And I will tell you, if you haven't established what your true intrinsic values are in the organization, like you said, like a perfume that is just there, spend the time and the money to do it. And it's a long process.
Excellent point.
My father never established them, but they were inherent in the organization. And we had to dig deep. And it took us 2 years to really work with a third party to help us think through what is it we're truly here for the long term. Okay? Not something that's the fad of the day, not something that is on our to-do list that we got to do, but truly what is it that you want anybody that works for you to grasp a hold and see that that's the way we live. So those are my couple things.
Those are excellent points. The value thing is so key, so often missed. And I love how you said your dad didn't write them down, but everybody knew what they were. You guys eventually formalized the process to make sure as you grew, and as more people got involved, that you had them in writing, in pen and paper, so you could always look at yourself and say, okay, does this particular decision we're going to make meet these 3 or 4 values that we've set out?
Yep.
Personal question for you. What brings you happiness?
Seeing people grow in an organization. It's interesting. I named a president to the company in 2018. His name's Greg Smith. He graduated from UVA, came to work for us when he graduated from UVA. When Chris and I were partners, we groomed him. When Chris passed away, I continued to groom him over the years. And to turn the company over to him on the day-to-day operations was very hard in the beginning. And you want to talk about so gratifying now. It's remarkable to see what he's done and the team he's developed to help him run the organization. So I am more of an advisory role now at this point, and probably a little more on longer term strategic planning and what's the bigger picture for the organization. And also I'm working with Clark as a whole enterprise on what does the whole Clark organization look like.
Sure.
So my pleasure now is just watching the companies thrive, be successful, to live to the values, and just have some fun.
So what's next for you? You're obviously involved in the more of advisory role, but in a lesser capacity. You're going to travel? You're going to what do you plan on doing next?
Who knows? Work harder.
Well, if you love it, why not?
You know,
Well, Mike,
my current wife Kelly and I, you know, we talk about traveling. We bought a piece of property. We built a beautiful home, and it's up in the mountains. And you know, we really enjoy spending time there and spending time with each other. And who knows? Who knows? But she knows I need
it's
to
tough.
work.
It's tough to step away, though, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, it's been your life for 30, 40, 50 years. You know, you don't just flip that switch one day and then you stop having that drive to work and enjoy, like you said, the people. You came back for the people, and it's so hard to, not that you have to let it go entirely, but you understand what I'm saying. When you take a step back, you don't get to see them every day, and you're not as necessarily involved, and that's not always easy for business owners.
Now, and what I'll tell you is, you know, I've talked to my partners over at Clark and told them years ago, my original deal that I had cut with Clark was I was going to retire at 55. And at 55, I said, you got at least another 5 years with me. And they basically have been supportive of.
You're pulling the old Tom Brady move.
I never officially retired. That's the difference.
Yeah, that's true.
And they've helped keep me busy on some other stuff for a bunch of different things, and I'm very appreciative of that. And you know, I find that not only physical health is important, mental health is just important, and to keep that mind active. And if I can help and mentor and advise people, then maybe that's what my role is right now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mike, for all of your time. You've been incredibly gracious. You've given us so much good information. How can people reach out to you if they have questions, or where can they learn more about your company and about your story?
They can go to our website at shirleycontracting.com. You'll get all the info on the company there, and you can also reach out to us through that website.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again for another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. Just a reminder, as Mike aptly told us today, make sure whenever you have specific situations in your business that you get the right team of advisors. This is a business podcast where we talk about legal, financial. You never want to hear something that you never want to hear something on a podcast and then take it as the gospel truth and then apply it to your particular circumstance, and then it doesn't turn out and then you want to sue us. Just the disclaimer that we have at the end of every single lesson, and Mike told us the best, get a good team of advisors. Thank you so much for joining us. Mike, thank you again so much for your time. Everyone, have an excellent rest of your week, and we'll talk to you again next Wednesday.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.